John Fisher MacMillan was born to John and Mary MacMillan on March 24, 1890, in the village of Bothwell, Scotland, a small community along the north bank of the River Clyde, 9 miles from Glasgow. When the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, plunged the world into war on June 28, 1914, John was content to stay out of the British Army. It wasn't until early in 1916, when he was roughly 28 years old, that John volunteered to serve in the 8th East Surrey Regiment. The 8th was already fighting in France, but newly commissioned 2nd Lieutenant John MacMillan didn't join them right away. First, he was sent to Ireland with other new recruits to help put down the Easter Rebellion of April 1916, and wouldn't reach France until the beginning of July, just in time for the Battle of the Somme. 1 month later, on August 17, 1916, John sat down and wrote a letter to Margaret Lee, an acquaintance in New York. He was now in command of Company D, which was stationed in the village of Erkingham, 4 miles behind the lines. Dear Miss Lee, you will observe that I'm now on French soil. I left England about a month ago, and since then my experiences have been rather varied. I spent the first few days on the Somme, where the great offensive is taking place, and now we are holding another part of the line. What I observed at the Somme could fill a book, but of course we are not permitted to write about all the things we see. The fighting there goes on very furiously, and it would be difficult for you in beautiful America to picture to yourself the awful experience of modern warfare. Apart from the intense bombardments and the unfortunate loss of human life, some of the sights are very pleasant and interesting. One evening on the Somme, I saw about 100 aeroplanes in the sky at one time, and witnessed a fight between their aeroplanes and ours, in which Fritz came out second best. The manner in which transport is brought to the firing line at night is also a wonderful sight. One can stand on a piece of elevated ground and count the large motor lorries by the hundreds as they wind their way slowly but steadily up the firing line. I have traveled over a good part of France, and every place is so beautiful, and the people are very kind. And I shall willingly lay down my life for a country so beautiful and so fair. It is just 2 days since we left the trenches, and now we are enjoying a rest. The usual procedure is for a regiment to be 6 days in the firing line, and about 10 days out. During these 6 days, one gets very little sleep. Boots are not taken off except when washing feet, and of course your bed is simply a hole in the ground. Shells and bullets fly about in all directions, and one never knows when one's supreme moment is coming. However, it is remarkable how reconciled one gets to such conditions. A shell bursts within 10 yards of a man, and if he survives the explosion, he simply shrugs his shoulders, lights a cigarette, and keeps on smiling. Such is the morale of the British soldier in the firing line. The idea is conveyed in a popular little song, which he sings on the march, and runs something like this.
Pack up your troubles in your old kit bag and smile, smile, smile. While you bellow separate to light your fag, smile, boys, that's the style. What's the use of worrying? It never was worthwhile. Oh, pack up your troubles in your old kit bag and smile, smile, smile.
What do you think of it, Margaret? Eh? Some song. By the way, lest I forget, there's a New Yorker who is an officer in our regiment, and many a pleasant talk I have with him about the old place. My last letter to you was written from Ireland, a country I was very sorry to leave. I made some excellent friends in the south of Ireland, and as a matter of fact, I nearly lost my heart to a nice little colleen in Cork. In the event of our coming through this war, another officer and myself have made up our minds to settle down in the south of Ireland, and live a quiet, peaceful life on some farm. And then you and Jane can come over and spend your vacation with us. What do you think of this idea? I took part in the suppression of the rebellion, but our activities were confined to the provinces of Cork, Waterford, and Wexford, and I was more than glad we had no occasion to fire even a single shot. The Irish people as a whole are very loyal, and it was very unfortunate that the rebellion should have occurred. The Kaiser gained nothing by it, as that little Cork girl used to sing to me, and old Kaiser Bill, he never will be, where the mountains of Moran sweep down to the sea. I am writing this letter about 4 miles behind the firing line, and the sounds of the guns are ringing in my ears. How long it may last, we know not, but we of British blood shall fight till a glorious victory is ours. On these parts, Shakespeare might truly say, there's nothing serious in mortality. Remember me to all my New York friends, and you yourself accept very kind regards. J.F. MacMillan. During the Battle of Fayetteville Ridge on September 28, 1916, the 7th West Kent's Regiment charged Schwaben Redoubt, a massive German position made up of snaking trenches, machine gun positions, and bunkers that had been built and held by the 26th German Reserve Division since 1914. They were only successful in securing the south face of this strong point, and on the night of September 29th, the West Kents were relieved by the 8th East Surrey Regiment. The 8th was given the unenviable task of attacking the northern face at 4 p.m. the following day. An enemy barrage at 6 a.m. forced Company D back some 200 yards, but John and his men soon retook the ground. Messengers sent to the rear with targets for their artillery couldn't get through, or their message arrived too late. At one point, British shells began to fall among the men, adding even more casualties. The wait must have been agonizing, and any surprise advantage the 8th may have had was long gone. But they had their orders, and so they waited for the attack. By the time 4 p.m. came, both companies had suffered heavy casualties, but still these battered, muddy men rose up and left their trenches in 2 waves spaced 50 yards apart. They ran through rifle and machine gun fire, over ground pitted with craters and wreckage, past the blasting artillery shells, and somehow, by some miracle, they managed to reach the redoubt's north face, and hold it until relief came that night. John was the only officer to escape injury or death during the charge, and once the remnants of Company D had been led back to the rear, he faced the difficult task of writing to the families of the dead. He would often receive a reply to these letters, asking for further information, and 2 of them survive. Why John kept them is hard to say. Each is brief and heavy with the writer's grief, not the kind of correspondence one would normally wish to keep. Perhaps he felt some sense of guilt over their loss. These were his men after all, his responsibility. October 8th, 1916. Dear Sir, it is my painful lot to write on behalf of my parents and family, to acknowledge your letter received this morning. The sad news of my brother's death has come as a great shock to us all, as we had trusted that he would have been spared to come back to us. The burden certainly is lightened, if only very slightly, by the most kind and sympathetic expressions in which the news was conveyed, and it is some source of consolation to know that Fred met his death bravely in the execution of his duty. We deeply appreciate the kind thought which prompted your letter, and if I may trespass on your kindness, we should indeed be sincerely grateful to you for any other details concerning his end that you may be able to send us. Again, thanking you for your kindness, and wishing you one and all God's protection during your perilous tasks. Edward Hillard. Private Frederick Hillard was 32 years old. His body was eventually recovered, and today he rests at Mill Road Cemetery in Cambridge, England. October 11th, 1916. Dear Sir, I beg to tender yourself and your platoon my sincere thanks for your kind letter regarding my son, Corporal Woolley. I need not tell you what a terrible shock it has been to me and his mother, as he was our only boy. And could you or anyone of your platoon, at any time, let me know how he died and where he is buried, I should feel extremely grateful. Again thanking you for your kindness and praise of my boy, F.G. Woolley. Corporal Henry Woolley was 26. His body was never recovered, and his name is engraved upon the Fayetteville Memorial, along with so many others who remain upon the battlefield. Second Lieutenant MacMillan was soon back in the front lines. On May 3, 1917, he watched a sporadic artillery barrage illuminate the jagged remains of Cherizay village. It was 3:45 a.m., and what should have been a devastatingly thick splinter bombardment was taking forever to build momentum. It didn't help that one of the artillery batteries had started firing ahead of schedule. They were preparing for a charge, and tensions in the trench were high. Companies A and B were going to push off first, and establish a line running northeastwards along a section of road that stretched from a bullet-riddled statue of St. Michael to within a few hundred yards of Triangle Wood. Then, once this line was established, another was to be set up across the River Sens by Companies C and D. When the time finally came for Company D to set off into no man's land, they ran right into the first wave. All was confusion, and German soldiers blended in with their British foe in the dark. Despite these setbacks, Company D's first obstacle, known as Narrow Trench, was soon found to be lightly held and easily taken. At 6:40 a.m., Companies D and B crossed the River Sens and began digging in about 600 yards beyond St. Michael's statue. Company B's left flank was unprotected, and they quickly came under heavy machine gun fire from Triangle Wood, while Company C was still on the other side of the river. For 3 or 4 hours, the situation remained unaltered. Company D and the rest struggled to hold their ground under an intense shower of fire, and it was during this time that Second Lieutenant MacMillan was wounded. An unknown soldier who was by his side describes what happened next in a letter to John's mother, dated May 21st, 1917. Dear Mrs. MacMillan, I have been asked to write to you as I was the last person to see your son. I was about 50 yards away when your son was wounded, and I immediately went to see what I could do for him. I did everything possible for the wound, and saw myself that it was carefully bound up. Then helped him back about 500 yards, and left him in a deep shell hole, as I wasn't able to go back myself any further. A little later I went across to see your son again, and spent nearly 2 hours with him, as there was very heavy machine gun and shell firing going on, and I wasn't able to get back. I am afraid his wound was rather painful, and his arm and shoulder were very stiff, and he was unable to walk without help. I examined his wound again and found it was not bleeding. During this time he smoked 2 cigarettes, but hardly talked at all. When he did speak, it was only to ask me whether the attack was progressing all right. There were no stretcher bearers up in front to take the wounded, and we could not spare any men to look after them. Later, we were almost surrounded, and had to fall back, leaving our wounded behind. The regiment was eventually pushed back to its original positions, and Second Lieutenant MacMillan was reported missing in action. Months passed without any news reaching his anxious mother, and in response to a request for further information, Major Whiteman, the regiment's second in command, wrote to her on August 26th. Dear Mrs. MacMillan, no further information has been obtained of your son, Second Lieutenant J.F. MacMillan, M.C., who has been reported wounded and missing since May 3rd, on which date he took part in an assault on the German lines in the vicinity of Cherizay. He was in command of D Company. I understand that Captain Place and Lieutenant Morse have given you all the information they possibly could. Owing to an error, our Colonel, Lieutenant Colonel Irwin, DSO, had omitted to write, and as he is at present in the line, he has asked me to write you on behalf of himself and the officers and men of the battalion to express our deepest sympathy in your strenuous time of anxiety. I do not wish to give you cause to build up hope, which may prove false, but I think there is a reasonable chance of his being a prisoner. We all regret the loss of such a gallant and efficient young officer, and express the hope that we'll soon hear of his being all right, although a prisoner of war. Personally, I wish to tender my sincere sympathy in your anxiety. Your son was initiated into ordinary trench warfare, and in hand-to-hand fighting, under my command. Along with other officers of my company, he did most gallant work at the Schwaben Redoubt in September last year. Believe me, sincerely, J. Whiteman, Major. The uncertainty and anxiety surrounding the fate of her son must have been agonizing. Every day waiting, worrying, hoping a letter or telegram would come with the good news that he was safe and sound. For so many mothers, that letter never came. But Mary MacMillan was lucky. Her son was alive. John had been captured shortly after the battle, and by October of 1917, he was writing to his mother regularly on German POW stationery from a camp in Freiburg, Germany. October 20th, 1917. Dear Mother, I enclose a check for £20, which I wish Lizzie to cash at the Bede Linen Company Bank, and then send the money to Mrs. M. Fellows, near Boot Inn, Annesley Village, near Atherton, Warwickshire. This is the wife of a private, who is an orderly in our camp, and he is not permitted to send money home. He has given me the money, and hence the check. I hope you are now receiving the £4 per month from Colonel H. The battalion does not accept any money from you. Of course you can save it up and spend it on holidays. I would like you to send me a strong pair of brown boots with nails on the toe and heel, but not on the center. So far, I have been able to buy boots from various sources, but I should like a brown pair for next summer. Now, boots are very likely to go missing between home and here, so that you should put them in a tin box and make sure they are properly packed, as it is almost impossible to get leather for repairs, and since you are not permitted to send out raw leather, it would be a good idea if you would also put in the box an old pair of boots or shoes, which could be cut up for repairing purposes. Some strong leather laces and a pair of soles would also be handy. Size of boots number 8. If necessary, have a double sole on boots. Like the rest of the officers here, I get rather sick always asking for things in letters, but we cannot help ourselves. I enclose 3 postcards of the officers who form our mess. You will observe that we looked not so badly. One of them has the signature of all the officers. You should keep this one. This morning we had a walk out in the country. If the weather is fine, we go out 3 times a week. Otherwise, it is prison life. The town of Freiburg is beautifully situated. Its streets are broad and well paved, and most of the houses are excellently built. Immediately outside the town there are the Black Forests, while the whole district is very hilly. We can see the hills which separate France from Alsace-Lorraine. Behind these hills lie the firing line, and often we hear the reports of the guns. One of his fellow POWs wrote to John MacMillan's sister Lizzie on February 21st, 1918, shortly after being released from the Freiburg POW camp. Dear Mrs. MacMillan, I have just been exchanged from Germany and left Freiburg about 10 days ago. I was in the same room as your brother and left him in the best of health, but very envious. We had very jolly times in room 68, in spite of being prisoners of war, but I am afraid we were very lazy. Your brother's activity put us all to shame. If there is anything you would like me to tell you, I shall be only too glad to write, and the address above will find me for the next 3 weeks or so. Yours very truly, K. Atkin. When the war ended on November 11, 1918, John was freed from his POW camp and finally returned to England on December 6th. 1 year later, he boarded the SS Caledonia, bound for America, and settled in New York City. John soon met a young German woman by the name of Mary Johann Leek, whom he married in 1920. The newlyweds moved into an apartment at 631 West 207th Street, where Mary gave birth to their first child, also named Mary, on October 4th, 1921, and a son named John on April 12th, 1924. John MacMillan found success as a naval architect and worked hard to support his family, often traveling for business. He died unexpectedly in Washington, D.C. on May 1st, 1946, and was laid to rest at St. Patrick's Cemetery in Smithtown, New York.